Pokemon Leaf Green was right at the end of a slump for Pokemon that was created ever since the first game. However, the Pokemon company figured out what the problem was and fixed everything for the next game, making Pokemon Leaf Green the most important Pokemon game ever released.
Pokemon is now in full mania.
If it sounds like the kids are speaking another language, they are.
Pokemon the movie joins Pokemon the video game.
Pokemon in the 90s was huge. From the launch in Japan of Pokemon Red and Pokemon Green, to the launch in America with Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue. Don't know why they're different. Everyone and their grandmother knew who that little yellow mouse was. The development of the first generation of Pokemon led to a Pokemon anime, as well as a Pokemon Yellow game, which was kinda like the anime, but also kinda like the game, with all 151 Pokemon in it. Not including Missing though. I'm sorry. All taking place in one small area inside of a little tiny Game Boy cartridge. Here is a Pokemon Japanese Yellow cartridge. Look how tiny this thing is. When you compare it to other games that released at the time, like this one, you can see that they managed to fit an entire giant game into this little thing. After finishing the first game, the second game, Pokemon Gold and Silver, was immediately greenlit and in development. The game was first announced at Nintendo Space World in 1997, which was a little convention that Nintendo ran every year in Japan. These games weren't just another version of Pokemon Red and Blue, oh no. These games were completely different. They featured an all new set of Pokemon. Featured color, wasn't announced at the time yet, and so many other things. But one of the biggest things added was backwards compatibility with the first games. This was the selling point for Pokemon Gold and Silver. Well, one of the selling points of the game. The game was supposed to be released after the first season of the Pokemon anime ended. This would have been the perfect time to release the game. Nothing would have stopped them from releasing the game at this time. It just makes perfect sense. It's brand synergy, right? Right? Pokemon Stadium was the first real spin-off to the Pokemon series, and it was on the Nintendo 64. You know, like this thing? Not only that, the Game Freak were running low on money. Again, they were running low on money when they made the first games as well. If Game Freak had no money, there was obviously no Pokemon Gold and Silver. Obviously, they still had money to survive. It's not like they were dead broke. But they needed a solution, and that solution wasn't Pokemon. Let me introduce you to a guy named Junichi Masuda. Remember the guy from the intro of this very video? Hold on.
Yeah. Pokemon. You see that guy right there? That's him. That's the guy I was talking about. He's the chief creative fellow at the Pokemon company. No, I'm not saying fellow as a joke. His official title actually uses the word fellow. Anyway,
Masuda was born in Japan and played the trombone. Doesn't sound related yet, but we're getting there. While learning music, he was drawn to some of the classical music that everyone knows, like Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring and Shostakovich's Symphony No. 5. Yeah, I know what they are. Bet you don't. Loser! I remember The Rite of Spring being interesting, like the story behind it. I'm not going to talk about that. This isn't a music channel. But Masuda also had another passion, computer graphics. He went to go work at Game Freak in 1989, and he worked on almost every single project they made. Game Freak at the time was a pretty new company. Apparently they were like a magazine company before, I don't know. I saw some YouTube video one time say that, so it might be true, I don't know. And they hadn't really made anything huge. Look, I don't think Yoshi NES was the biggest NES game of all time. That was developed by Game Freak, fun fact. Like a puzzle game, but Yoshi. There's an egg at the bottom, and then there's a bunch of things that appear on screen, and then the egg falls down and you control Mario at the bottom or whatever. Or is that a different game? I don't know. However, Game Freak knew that they had something up their sleeves. They just needed to release it, but they needed money. As I said, it's a common theme for Game Freak. So they needed to make sure Pokemon, at the time and technically still known as Pocket Monsters, was good. It took him and the rest of the team years, literally 6 years, to develop Pokemon Red and Green, while also making other games as Yoshi. And these other games were used to fund the development process of Pocket Monsters Red and Green. They started Pokemon at around the beginning of the Game Boy's lifespan, like after it released, not, in like 1990. If it released in 1996 and you go back 6 years, that's like 1990. But when they finally released it, Game Boy sales in Japan were on a decline. See, Japan was their main place that they were going to sell the game. They didn't even think about an English localization yet. It was Japan. And if the Game Boy was not selling well in Japan, then what the hell are they supposed to do? People in the industry that were friends of Masuda were telling him, this is a bad idea. Do not release Pokemon on the Game Boy. No one's going to buy it. This could have been bad for Game Freak. But they still trusted themselves. Masuda worked on a lot of the soundtrack and like the sound effects. Pretty much all the sound you hear in Pokemon Red and Green was done by him. And he did a little bit of programming as well. Fun fact, while developing the game, and some other Pokemon games, almost all of the data was removed because of like a computer failure, which is kind of insane. It could have been completely lost and we'd never have what we have today. It's like the Toy Story 2 thing, if you've heard of it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it. The signs in the universe were pointing to Pokemon being a disaster. But finally, they got to the point where they could release the game, and they did! And it was a success, leading to everything that I mentioned earlier. But now they had an even bigger task, developing Pokemon 2. Technically like 5 by the time it came out, because Red, there's 1, Green 2, Blue 3, Yellow 4, Gold 5, and Silver 6, I don't know. What could the follow-up to Pokemon be? Game Freak had to think quick. The original release date was set for 1997, with a price yet to be decided. That's literally what it says on the Nintendo website. The game was intended for a release on the original Game Boy, the DMG ones, and the Super Game Boy, the SNES add-on where you can put a Game Boy in an SNES. It adds colour, but also you can play it on the big screen. That's the main selling feature. And the title was revealed to be Pokemon 2 Gold and Silver. Or Pokemon Gold and Silver 2. The 2 cover is up. Look at the logo. What's the actual title supposed to be? They announced all these new features in the game, such as skateboards, pre-evolution state of Gen 1 Pokemon, clock function. That's what it says, clock function. It's the day and night cycle. Genders for Pokemon, because there was only Nidoran, and they had 2 different versions of Nidoran, but now they're doing it with all the Pokemon. But most of the time they don't have a different version. I don't know, they got bored one day. 100 new Pokemon. That's pretty big. More HMs and TMs. Hidden moves and TMs. And backwards compatibility with the first games. They also appointed Masuda as sub-director of Pokemon 2, Gold and Silver. As I mentioned earlier, the release of Pokemon Gold and Silver was meant to be when the anime ends. And if you watch the anime, at least the first episode of the anime, you'd know the connection. At the start of Season 1, Ho-Oh, a new Pokemon, makes its first appearance in any Pokemon media ever. This was the perfect tie-in. How good was that? Surely it's coming out soon, right? Wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. The game was then announced for the end of 1997, which, to be fair, Season 1 of the anime wasn't over yet, but Season 1 of the anime also goes for like 1 billion episodes. Jump to November and demos are finally available to play. However, it seems the game's now coming out in March 1998. Another delay, but this wouldn't be the end of the troubles. Oh no, it's just the beginning.
An investigation's underway in Japan into why more than 600 children suffered from convulsions and vomiting after watching a television cartoon. Drop dead for me. Won't you just